So, Raycasts, you wanna know how to make them? Well, I will show you in this video. So, what we are gonna do in this video is create what I call a trigger zone under our object. And be able to use this trigger zone to detect the ground. This method is gonna be different from what we did in our previous video, where we make it so the ground detection only works when our object directly collides with the ground. In this case, our trigger zone, or pretty much Raycast, will do the work for us. To create our first Raycast, we need to add a few new variables to our script. I'll be skipping the writing of these variables, but don't worry, I will make sure to explain all of them when I skip it. And now, after skipping, we added 4 new variables to our script. We have a float named ground check distance, a layer mask, a vector tree, and another vector tree. We are gonna talk about all of these, but first let's start with ground check distance. In our case, ground check distance determines how far the cast will check for the ground. Since we want to use our Raycast to detect the ground, we need the cast beneath the object. But that's not the only way you can use Raycasts. For example, we can create a Raycast that is on the right side of our object. Or maybe we can make one that is on the left side. Or on the upside. I don't know what's the right word for that. Right. As I said, on the upper side of our object. We can even create a Raycast that is not even touching our object. But we won't need to do any of that in today's video's subject. Instead, we need to create a Raycast that is just beneath our object. Next up, we have ground layer, a layer mask. This will allow us to filter out objects in our scene and specify what objects can be considered the ground. We can actually go back to our editor and create a new layer now. It's pretty much the same as creating a new tag, which we've already done in the previous video. Let's start with picking a random object in our scene. For example, you can pick the main camera or the directional light or any of the objects. I'll be picking the ground object. It doesn't make any difference anyway. As you can see in the ground objects inspector window, we have our ground tag, which we created in the previous video. We will be going to the layer part here, and then we will be clicking add layer. Here, let's create a new layer that we can use, calling it ground. Now all that is left is assigning this ground layer to our ground object, to the objects that we deem the ground, which will be considered the ground object, and then this cube that we added in the previous video. So to do that, we'll be picking this object, clicking this object, and then going to its layer. We will be switching its layer to our ground layer that we created. We will be doing the same thing to our ground object. Thirdly, we have a vector tree variable named box half extents. This will allow us to determine the size of our cast. In this video, we will be creating a box cast, which is one of the several options we have. And box cast uses half extents. Let me give an example on what I mean by half extents. Let's say that we assigned a view Alright, let's say that we assigned a value of 0.5 to our half extents. That means the size of our cast's left side will be 0.5, and then the same thing will happen to our cast's right side. And mixing the two, our cast will have the size of 1. The same logic also applies here. If we apply a value of 1 to our half extents, then it makes 2. Finally, we have box center, which will allow us to define the starting point of our cast. Now that we got these 4 variables, we will be assigning data to them, starting with box center. The value of our box center will be the exact position of our object. So we'll be writing box center transform position. Next, we have our box half extents. To determine the value of our half extents, we need to return to the editor and look at the size of our object. Clicking on our player character, we see that its size is a simple 1, 1, 1. So by that logic, the data we need to assign to our half extents is gonna be 0.5, 0.5, and then the same. Let's make them float values. Next, we have our ground check distance. For now, let's try to make it something like 0.5 to see if it will work. Next, we will be assigning data to our ground layer. We can't do that in our Visual Studio. Well, actually we can do it in our script, but this time we will be doing that in our editor. First, we will need to change the visibility of this variable by changing the private into a public. Saving that, let's go back to our editor. Now, if we select our player object, we can see that the ground layer can be visible in the inspector window right here. So the only thing we need to do is assign the ground layer that we created into this ground layer by clicking this, and then there it is. And it's that easy. Now that we set up our variables, the only thing we need to do next is create our raycast by writing the following. So now that we have our box cast set, let's test it in our editor to see if it will work. Hopping back to our editor and nope, that's not working. Okay, so as you can see by me spamming spacebar, our script doesn't seem to work very nice with or Raycasts. But that's okay, that's fine. I have a plan B. Boxcast doesn't seem to work, so why don't we bring in its cousin? What was its name? CheckBox. Why don't we bring in CheckBox? Technically, CheckBox isn't a shapecast like Boxcast is. But in our case, CheckBox is gonna do the same Boxcast was supposed to do. Detect the ground. To use CheckBox, we don't need to add any big details to the big changes to our script. We only need to do 2 things. First, replace the boxcast here with CheckBox, and then we will be changing the variables here a little bit. We won't add anything new. In fact, we are gonna delete this one right here. Also, oh god, that voice crack, oh my god. But outside of deleting this, we need to change the order of these variables. Now that we shifted from a boxcast to a checkbox, let's test our code again. I really hope it works this time, and there it is. Thankfully, unlike our boxcast, our checkbox is working pretty fine without any issues.